This is the start of Lent. I already mentioned it earlier. And we're going to do a journey through the Gospel of Matthew. And really, we're just dealing with the last week of Jesus' life. But before I start, you know that we're doing something fun. We have a kind of a church mascot, a teddy bear, that's accompanying us on some of our trips that we take just to kind of show how widely just this local church impacts the world. And our bear this week made it all the way to Florence, Italy. And has a little mask on because he's in Italy. If you don't know what that is, has the little virus mask on in Italy. But that was taken just 2 days ago. And so that is where he's been this week and many other destinations yet to come. But there's a reason we're starting with this story in Matthew. First, it's the story that starts the last week of Jesus' life. It's the event that happened immediately following Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem. Now, oddly enough, if you go to the Gospel of John, this is the very first story in the Gospel of John. I thought you said it was the last week of Jesus' life. Yes. Gospel of John is in no way chronological. It is not telling you a story from start to finish. It's throwing in events. And it's almost as if John is saying, hey, this is the story that kind of tells you why Jesus' death is meaningful. It puts context. A number of years ago, we remember the Passion of the Christ movie. Now, there is wide range of opinion on everything, and you are free to love it. I despise that movie for a lot of different reasons, one of which that was a movie that didn't have any context. It didn't tell you why this death was meaningful or important. There was no story around it. It was just this scene of the crucifixion. John is telling you everything you read afterwards kind of flows from what happened at the temple. And so I'm reading. In Matthew, it's very short. Then Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who were selling and buying in the temple and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. He said to them, "It is written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer,' but you are making it a den of robbers." The blind and the lame came to him in the temple, and he cured them. So here's the picture. In other Gospels, Jesus grabbed a whip and was being very forceful and being sure that all these people were driven out. So the first question I have is, wait a minute, is this really Jesus? This doesn't sound like the Jesus from most of our imaginations and from most of the other stories. Jesus is love. Jesus is peace. Jesus is all kindness. Jesus would turn the other cheek. In this story, the thing Jesus is turning, he's turning the tables. Wait a minute, Jesus is a pacifist. And all of these are true, to some extent. But they just don't tell the whole story. This scene certainly turns all our expectations on its head. This is a Jesus that acts from kind of righteous anger. This is a Jesus that comes in and sees something that he thinks, I cannot put up with this any longer. Now, let me be very clear, and I've had this discussion with lots of people through the years. The people who were at the temples, the money changers, the people who were selling the doves and the birds for sacrifice, most everything in Mark, either Matthew or Luke also has, or Matthew and Luke has. And then John has its own series of events. There's very few things that are in John that are also in the Synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Basically two things. Jesus feeding the 5,000. Oh, and Jesus turning over these tables in the temple. The wedding at Cana of Galilee, the Synoptic Gospels don't have that. Raising Lazarus from the dead. I would expect all 4 Gospels to have that, only John. Some of the great parables and teaching stories. You can look through John all you want. You won't find a single parable in the Gospel of John. They're not there. John has its own agenda, but they all seem to coalesce around this one event. This one event that seems to, by the way, challenge our understanding of who this Jesus was. A Jesus who boldly takes a stand. A Jesus who acts with decisiveness, anger. And so I think one thing I would like to say is I think there are issues in life that are worth taking a stand. I think we can agree with this. Some of us go through life, there are people that go through life never taking a stand. And they feel pushed. And it adds this interior tension. I told the story, it was about 1.5 years ago, of being in a, yes, I'm embarrassed, please don't make me turn in my man card. I was doing good deeds with my wife. I was in Bed and Beyond with her, and we were waiting at the customer service line, and the woman in front of us just starts screaming at the person behind the counter. And the tension built and built and built and built, you know, and you got more uncomfortable, more uncomfortable, more uncomfortable. Should I say something more uncomfortable? I think eventually my wife pulled out some coupons in her purse and said, look, if this will make you happy, here, use my coupons. We end up kind of getting pushed far beyond where we would normally go. And the more we're pushed, the more tension, the more unease it creates, until it creates this constant state of unease. So whether in all parts of life, it's important to know, if you're a teen, I would say, know very definitely where your line is. And wherever your line is, don't go near it. There are some people that make a line and then they walk over to the edge and they go, wow, the other side, that looks really good over there. I'm going to see exactly how close I can get. Maybe if I get right here, I get the edge of my shoes right on my line. Don't do that. Whether your line is where your line is with alcohol, where your line is with drugs, where your line is with sex. Wherever your line is, the place to make the stand is before you're in the back seat. Sorry. It's before you go to the party where everybody else is drinking. Before you go hang out with the friends who always want to take drugs. The stand is, know where your line is so bright you won't go near it. I was dealing with a teenager a few years ago who was about 14. And I could see the life was going down a difficult path. And I talked to him about that. And I said, he looked at it and it seemed there was no hope for him. He had this feeling like he didn't have any hope. And I said, listen, your life could turn out completely different, but here's one of the things you're going to have to do. And he said, what? I said, for the next 4 years, you might have to lose everybody that you think is a friend right now. The next 4 years, you might go by without these friends, but it's better you go through the next 4 years alone, but in a position to succeed, than to go through the life with these friends for the next 4 years and take you to a place that you don't want to go. You're going to have to find places to be, find new people to build your life around. You've got to sometimes lose situations, friendships that you're used to. Sometimes there are people who've been known to make mistakes when they get in that time of life where they date and start picking a spouse. I counsel people, you better know what your deal breakers are. And once you know what your deal breakers are, do not go there. He may be a great guy, she may be a great girl, but that doesn't mean it's the guy or the girl. And once you know that, I said this to my kids, you got to be willing to make the girl cry. You got to be willing to make the guy cry. That's a far less pain than walking across a whole lot of lines. It all crashes down 20 years from now, 30 years from now. How about job demands? If you're not careful, your employer, your company will take as much as you allow them to take. Now, I know everybody sometimes you have to do the extra. You got to work overtime. There's the big project. I'm not talking about that. Hope you realize that's not what I'm talking about. But sometimes even our employer can start to push our line. Here's the problem. Once your line starts to move, it's really hard to get it to stop again. Eventually, your friends, eventually the company, eventually your spouse will place the line for you. No friend, no position, no paycheck is worth your character or worth your life. Now, here's a story. It's one of my favorite quotes, and I'll only share it because it's historical, and it's one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite people, Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill, especially when he was younger, he would like to mix it up with a lot of different people. This is a famous quote. There is disagreement on who he said it to. There was a woman in Parliament named Lady Astor that he would frequently get into tussles with, or a lot of people say this quote was just from a wealthy socialite. Churchill noticed something that she had said, and he was moving in for the kill. And here's the quote. He said, "My dear lady, would you consider spending the night with me for £5 million? That was a lot of money in the 30s. I mean, still a lot of money then, but it was really a lot more money then. And thinking that she was going to kind of put him down, she said, "Sir Winston, for £5 million, even I would consider spending the night with you, though we would have to discuss the terms." That's what she said. And then Winston Churchill looked at her and said, "Well, my dear lady, would you spend the night with me for £5? And in mock disgust, she said, "Sir Winston, what kind of lady do you think I am?" And his response is, "Madam, I think we've already established that. We're just dickering over the price." That's one of my favorite quotes. My point is, once we determine there's a place in life over which we're willing to sell our character or sell our soul or sell our family or sell our integrity, it's hard to find a place where that line stops. Now, it may be not the most artfully phrased way. That's what Winston Churchill was saying in his way. Then there's the other end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is there are people who are willing to take every stand. We see that a little bit today, or a lot of different things. I will admit, between the two extremes, in my younger days, I was the guy who was willing to take every stand and get on battle gear. One benefit of age, I think, is learning to see the folly of too many stands. this, whatever was at the temple, was worth a stand for Jesus. Now my question is, what was this stand that he was taking? I think it had to have been important. So what was the issue? What was the issue that caused him to storm in with a whip and turn over tables and driving the money changers, driving the people out? I'm going back through my life and through my history. I know why. They were doing business on the Sabbath. And I think there's a point to be made here. I think if we have one way or another, I think it's important for us to have a time where we pull away from our normal activities. And we live in a day and an age where we don't pull out of any activities. And we think by, I don't know, doing hot yoga or rubbing crystals over ourselves, that everything will be better. When in older days, we used to get together with friends, we used to laugh, we used to eat together, we used to pray, and there was a day that was different. And I think we've kind of lost the wisdom in that. However, let me also say, I am also married to a nurse. And people get sick on Sunday. Heart attacks happen on Sunday. Emergency abdominal surgeries happen on Sunday. There are people that have to have a medication from a pharmacy on a Sunday because something happened on a Saturday night. I get it. I get it. I don't think that's the issue Jesus was dealing with. I know what it was. They were selling things in church. That has to be the issue. Girl Scout cookies were in the temple. There was a table of tagalongs, there's a table of Samoas and Thin Mints. Jesus waded in, flipping over. Samoas and Thin Mints were flying everywhere. If I'd have been there, I'd have gotten downwind of the Samoas. The Thin Mints are okay too. Jesus going in, how dare you pollute my temple with these overpriced but delicious cookies. We can't see Jesus doing that. Jesus wouldn't wade in because someone's selling Girl Scout cookies in church, which should be the first clue that this is probably not the issue that Jesus was dealing with either. We read in our text, Jesus said, "My house will be a house of prayer." Jesus is quoting from Isaiah chapter 56 here. And I've learned enough that when Jesus or when any of the New Testament writers quote from the Old Testament, you got to go to the Old Testament and read it first to figure out what they're trying to say. Isaiah 56 reads like this: "And there are foreigners who join themselves to the Lord. They love the name of the Lord, and they want to be His servants. And they keep the Sabbath, and they do not profane it, and they hold fast to my covenant. These I will bring to my holy mountain, and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar, for my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people. Thus says the Lord, who gathers the outcasts of Israel. And I will gather others to them besides those already gathered." Now let's just pretend for a second that this sanctuary is the temple in Jerusalem. And you'd have come in this door or that door, or this wonderful door for those of you who like to come in by the dumpster. Everywhere you're sitting would have been the court of the Gentiles. And if you'll just take, if you could make square out, if I push these altars out into a square, there would have been a little 3-foot high wall. And that 3-foot high wall was the dividing wall of partition. It's mentioned in Galatians. On it, there's a little sign that said, "Any Gentiles beyond this wall, your blood is on your own head." Anywhere on my side of that wall was for Jews only. And then back here where the drums are would have been the Holy of Holies. Let's all not snicker at the fact of a drummer being in the Holy of Holies for a second, but we can get past that. Now, where these tables were in the temple, Jesus had just come into the beautiful gate. Imagine coming in the door, and everywhere out where you are is tables where money's being changed, where birds are being sold, where all this thing's happening. The area set aside for the Gentiles, there's no room. They couldn't come in. Oh, the Jews could squeeze through there. This was clear. But all the room that the Gentiles had, they couldn't worship because it was being filled up by things that actually blocked their access to God. The purpose all along was for God to be able to reach everyone. And the tables and the commerce, it's not that they were just buying and selling. Some of you remember the 80s. There was a whole series of things that happened in the 80s. Those of you, I'm asking you to go back to the recesses of your memory. There were all these business models that came out in the 80s. First was Amway. I think Amway's still a thing. You're familiar with Amway. And then there was a water filter thing. And I can't remember the name. And then there was a long-distance telephone company plan. And all of them were that mid-level marketing. So you'd sign up for savings, but then if you got other people to come underneath you and get other people to sign up for the long distance, you got a cut of whatever they did, and if they got someone else underneath them, and it got to be this gigantic pyramid, the water filter was the same thing, Amway was the same thing, and there was a period of time, if you're in the wrong place, maybe the wrong church at the wrong time, you had 2 or 3 friends come to you with this great plan with this water filter. Some of you remember this. I was in Newton, Kansas, and I got sold on the long distance plan. And they said, listen, this is a great idea. You'll save this percentage, that percentage, whatever. But look, you're assistant pastor of the church. You can talk to everybody, and you can have them do it too and get the savings, and then you'll get part of everybody that they sign up. And I went, see, that's where you've left me. I said, because I refuse to use a position in the church in any way that will eventually come back where I get a monetary benefit. Won't do it. Period. I'm out. Whatever was going on in the courtyard at that time. And I even don't think it was because they were buying the doves. These people did need to sacrifice animals, and I don't think that was it. I just think it blocked out the Gentiles. And the Jews were selfishly hoarding God. So now it's 2020, a different time, different day, different age, different issues. The danger, though, still remains. Regardless of what we do, we never want our workings, we never want our language, we never want our daily lives, anything about what we do as a church, to push out anybody or to erect a barrier or barricade for anybody to get out. We live in a different age. Some of you remember, I'm back in the 80s again. Every pastor I knew either drove a Pontiac Bonneville or an Olds Delta 88, and they had it was that shiny suit era. Remember those shiny suits? They were terrible. Everybody looked like that. Now there are churches you go into, and the pastor's still in a suit. I get it. And there's other ones you go in, and the pastor's in a Hawaiian shirt, untucked, jeans, and a pair of Chuck Taylor tennis shoes. Now, can I just say something? I would look ridiculous in Chuck Taylor tennis shoes, jeans, and an untucked Hawaiian shirt. If I'm listening to anybody with an untucked shirt, I turn them off. I realize that's my issue. I'm a little more, I'm a little more reserved. Sometimes I think about what I should wear on Sunday. I try to push for some middle ground. If the guy comes in the suit, he's not particularly noticing what I'm wearing. Someone comes in jeans, not particularly noticing what I'm wearing. I don't want anybody to notice what I'm wearing. I just don't. I just kind of want to blend in. I just want to be like I want to be one of the crowd. I don't want anything that we do, anything to ever push away or be a barrier to anybody. See, that was the stand I think Jesus was taking. The Jews looked down on the Gentiles. They were unclean. They didn't measure up. They had to stop doing this or that, and once they stopped doing this or that, then we'll allow them into the temple. But until they stop doing this or stop doing that, they can't eat pork. They can't go to Red Lobster. Well, they can, but they got to get the maple glazed chicken. They can't get the lobster. If they go to Famous Dave's, they got to get the brisket. They can't get the pulled pork. And they can never, ever get a bacon double cheeseburger. That's killing 2 Jewish food laws with 1 sandwich. Once they stop doing all of that, then they're allowed in. The stand Jesus was making that day was different. He was going, stop. Everybody's allowed in. Everybody's allowed in. This is my Father's house. And you don't get to put the restrictions up on who can come in. It's easy to draw the parallels to today. Here's what I'm certain of. I am absolutely certain that God loves faithful people. And I'm also certain that those that live faithfully, morally upright lives are part of that group that He loves. I also think that's a good idea on a whole host of things. That kind of life will be lived well, will live better, will be lived with less issues, less struggles, less problems, will cause less burdens for ourselves, for all those reasons. That's all good. I mean, I'm the guy that still remembers the 2 times in my life I used a swear word. I've kind of always been a proper kind of person that way. One time I didn't mean to. Dog tried to bite me. Dog tried to bite me. Dog went through a portal into the past tense and tried to bite me. No, dog tried to bite me. And I stuttered, meant to say one word, another word came out. And the other time, well, the kid deserved it. But anyway, that's a whole different story. However, if we ever use that as an excuse to diminish, degrade, or distance anybody else, the sin is not theirs, the sin is mine. That's not what God intended. So as we go into this Easter of this Lent, we have to admit that we are fragile people too. And God calls us out of our fragile, faulty, corrupted existence. And we have no basis to look on anybody else's flawed, corrupted existence because their flaw is different than my flaw. The stand that Jesus took was a stand that's still worth taking today. And if I get inundated with Girl Scout cookies, I might buy 2 boxes of Samoas. But that wasn't the issue I don't think Jesus was facing. He was facing something far more foundational. And that is everybody, everyone is welcome in my kingdom.